Are you Yuri? Steve. Nice to meet you live.
We actually met at Singularity event.
Did we? I know you were there, but did we actually meet at the event?
I think yes, we met, but just for a couple of minutes.
Very briefly. Well, thanks for coming again.
Yeah. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah, nice to meet you again.
I did in your stuff you posted on the website, so
thank you. Thank you. And then there's we'll have to get you. Are you invited to the community, the LinkedIn community for Austin AI? I'll invite you to that too, because that's an easy way to get the content too.
Okay. That would be good.
Awesome. You guys want to go ahead and take a seat? We'll get started. Awesome. Well, I'm Blaine Prince. I am with City AI as well as Cognitive Scale. This is our first City AI event for the year. So glad you all could be here. First of all, I want to go ahead and thank our sponsors real quick. Capital Factory was generous enough to give us a space for us to hang out at this evening. And then Kung Fu AI also was generous enough to donate the food and beverages in the back. So thank you both for your help on this. So yeah, I wanted to first kind of just kick off the meeting with just a little bit of an introduction to the team that's here today. Again, myself, Blaine Prince, I'm an ambassador for City AI as well as the lead for AI ethics in North America, as well as a marketing leader at Cognitive Scale, which is a local AI company here in town. Then we also have George. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm George. I work at Amazon as a logistics scheduler. My background is more in transportation research, and that's where I've gotten kind of hands-on, dirty with the data, so to speak. So anything from time series and naturalistic driving data, like as cars are moving along, to eye tracking to kind of understand driver attention and distraction. And excited to kind of bring a discussion around augmented intelligence today.
Yeah, I'm Steve Meyer, ambassador for Austin AI, and my day job is co-founder for Kung Fu AI, and we're an artificial intelligence services company. We predominantly are doing strategy and solution development.
And then we also have Steven Strauss in the back. He's with Kung Fu, so he's also active in the community as well. So thanks for being here. Awesome. So one thing you will notice up here, besides the seat is empty, we do have a fourth seat empty over here. We're not missing anybody. This is really a metaphor for how we really like this conversation to go tonight. It's really supposed to be an open seat, an open conversation with everyone here. This is a community. And so, we want to make sure that you guys are involved in this conversation. We wouldn't call ourselves experts per se, but we are active in the field. We work heavily on this on a day-to-day basis, and we're very passionate about this industry.
And we think you guys are going to have really interesting contributions to the conversation as well. So, I mean, literally, small group, this will be easy to do. If you guys are seeing things in addition to what we're talking about, because we're not going to be able to canvas everything, please share, because there's a lot of people in here that may not know any of this, which is great too. And I think our information plus your knowledge is greater than just yours and just ours. So I think it'll be really interesting to have everyone collaborate on some of these topics where you guys feel comfortable and appropriate.
And the great thing is it really sets up the stage for how we are as a community, period. No, we are an international, global community. But we focus in the local level. So all of our communities are ran from the city level, but we are connected to a larger international organization that obviously brings a lot of benefits to it. One of the things we obviously focus on is really bringing applied AI stories to the market, really helping educate anyone who's interested in artificial intelligence on what's being done out there, what's possible, and then really just trying to be an evangelist for the Austin market and what we do in artificial intelligence. We, like I said, are globally focused, so we have ambassadors all around the world, and our headquarters for City AI is actually based out of Amsterdam. But the great thing, again, with this is that we have access to applied artificial intelligence stories that are happening all around the world. So we can really empower our local communities with these global stories and use the expertise that we have across the world to, again, bring something more rich and beneficial to this city. So this is, again, I said this is our first event for 2019, but we do events all the time. We focus on trying to do at least one event every quarter. These events have, they go anywhere between hands-on workshops to educational panels to, networking opportunities. Really the whole goal here is just to provide a gathering focal point for anyone interested in artificial intelligence here in Austin to come and learn, get their hands on, and be a part of the conversation happening here. Past things that we've done with, sorry, didn't mean to go backwards. It's going the wrong way now.
Swipe in the correct direction.
There we go. So we've done some workshops last year. We had a great South by Southwest event last year as well. It really kicked off the community. So we're excited to be back this year. South by Southwest is right around the corner. But we do have another event, if you guys are interested, on the 9th, from 6 to 9. We are going to be on the 8th floor, which if you haven't been, it's the new defense floor here at Capitol Factory. This is going to be a really cool demo mixer. It's going to have a lot of hot local AI companies that are going to be here showing off what they're doing in artificial intelligence. I believe Cognitive Scale will be there. I think
we have 16 companies signed up. Everything from individual contributors who are just working on some really interesting AI work as sole proprietors, all the way through companies to about the size of Cognitive Scale. A lot of startups working on some really innovative stuff. So if you want to see what the best of the Austin community has to offer, it's here in Capitol Factory. It's on the 8th floor, which is brand new, so it'll be fun to do that. And it'll also give you a sense of what we have to offer here and great networking. And though it's during South by, no badge required, so that's always a good thing too.
Yeah, now, before we get started, one thing I want to make sure you guys are all aware of, again, all of you are invited to be a part of this community. We have a LinkedIn site that we we can gather once a quarter or twice a quarter, but we always have some sort of stream of knowledge happening on our AI channel that we have through LinkedIn. So please, come join the group. Put any questions out there, and let's we can work as a community to start answering those questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Steve.
Yep.
And he's gonna kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
So it's an interesting topic. I have democratization, and the problem is this, right? Right now, AI is being dominated by people who are, in companies really, who are extremely wealthy and well-equipped. And there's not a whole lot going on, generally speaking, with the rest of the corporate world. And there's a lot of interesting tools and points of collaboration out there to really get everyone now involved with AI so it doesn't leave a lot of people behind. And what's interesting about this group, 'cause I've talked to almost everyone here, is that there are PhDs in the room, and there are people who are changing their careers from what would be considered a traditional non-technology field and are studying AI because they want to be prepared for the future of work. And I think that's incredible, first of all, that there's such a diversity of backgrounds here in the room, but that also means some of our more expert people who are here in the room can help the conversation with some of the junior people on ways to get involved and catch up, right? How do we catch up? So to give you a sense of kind of this unequal distribution of AI have and have-nots, 45% of what they call the tech oligopoly, which are all the companies you see over here, have the AI talent right now, which leaves 55% of the talent available if they're in a company for everybody else. So that is not an equal distribution. It's becoming a huge challenge because the Amazons and the Googles and the larger companies have the resources to find the top talent, to pay a lot of money for that talent early on and hold on to them over a long period of time. And as AI becomes important, I think you're all here because you agree that AI is going to be important to the future of really society and the economy, that this becomes a problem. So how do we democratize AI, and what's going on in democratization in regards to AI to bring it to everybody else and smooth out this unequal distribution? Because again, and this is from MIT, the biggest challenges they see are not maybe the things that you'd be thinking of. It's not necessarily worrying about job displacement, and it's not necessarily worrying about autonomous weapon systems that may blow us up, or Skynet even. They say the top challenges with AI is it's going to create a tremendous amount of wealth for very few people. And it's going to allow access. If we don't do something about it, the access will not be equal. So there's a lot of things we can do about that now, a lot of things people are doing about that to make this more of an equal opportunity technology. So there's a lot of things going on right now. One is just really the rise of open source and applying things like transfer learning. So the open source community is really spreading and proliferating. There's a lot of really great tools out there that are free that allows you to use already trained models and apply something called transfer learning against them, where you basically can take a currently mature model and teach it essentially a new trick. So for example, you can teach a convolutional neural net that may be classifying cats and dogs and teach it how to identify rare coins, for example, with new data. So that's a tremendous advantage for people who are not deeply technical and have the engineering background, where they can start to take something that's put a lot of hard work and it's already been developed and actually use it themselves and teach it to do something new. Now, I've listed a couple of things below, like PiTorch and Tensorflow and Theano, but I want to ask you guys, especially the ones that are more mature in this space, from an open source community, are there things that you guys are seeing that aren't on this list that you think has been really valuable to you, or do you have a favorite? Something that's provides you more value than others, because I think some of the people who are new to this would be really interested in knowing where they should start based on some of these open source options. Does anything come to mind in terms of what we're missing, or something that you have a comment?
Yeah, I've recently been exploring this framework called Flare.
Okay.
If you're not familiar with it, it's built on top of PiTorch, and it gives you access to basically all of the latest and greatest NLP models for embeddings like Elmo and BERT, any of the traditional like linear regression based models that you want, all of the pre-trained models for like NER tagging and parts of speech tagging. So it's all in just a very, very simple PiTorch package.
Yeah.
And you can run it all easily on like Google Colab. So you can spin this all up in literally like 60 seconds and have a model like pulled right out of the cloud, throw your data against it, and now you're good to go. And you don't have to be like overly deep technical. You can knock these things out really fast.
Nice.
On top of that, another tool that was really interesting that just came out from the group from Stanford is called Snorkel. They've been working on a natural image generation tool to expand utterance data. So if you only have really small data sets and you need a bigger data set to train, you can use Snorkel to generate new data sets.
That's fantastic. Awesome. And I've seen a lot of people go back and forth, people preferring TensorFlow versus PiTorch. Do you guys have any skin in the game there? Do you prefer one versus the other? Go for it.
I'll chime in again.
No, this is great.
PiTorch is really easy to use just right out of the box. So like without a whole lot of knowing or learning or doing anything, you can just grab PiTorch and start running with it. But I think from a production standpoint and scalability, like TensorFlow is going to be, above PiTorch from just a horizontally and vertical scalable solution, because it is backed a lot by like the Google framework. Although PiTorch is really great and fun to use, and I would say you should iterate through your products with it or projects with it.
Yeah.
Using TensorFlow in like a large scalable production is probably the better way to go.
Great. So there's a whole lot of free education. So for the people that didn't feel equipped to join that conversation, there's a lot of really great free education out there to help people catch up and to polish off skill sets that you may not have today. Go for it.
Can I get you back up? I was eating and I didn't stick.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In my mind, the biggest challenge here is not the frameworks and the tools. This field is extremely open. Everybody's papers are published in an open way. The tools are open. Most of the tools are open source. The thing that's hard to get is data for learning. And that's where the big companies like the Amazons and the Googles of the world have a big advantage over smaller companies. And that's where learners run into problem. You'll do your first machine learning tutorial using the eminence data set. Everyone's seen it, everyone's used it. But then after that, where do you go from there? The interesting data sets are a lot harder to find than really good tool sets.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And even going into transitioning into education, the one thing that isn't listed on here, but to the point of data, is there's grassroots groups starting to come together to help with just data literacy and data education. A lot of people just don't know the basic tenets of what data science is and how to do it successfully, and ultimately how to prepare data for the use of machine learning models. So yeah, these are all These are all big issues that we're starting to see people try to solve. But from an AI machine learning standpoint, there's a lot of great places where you can get educated. I've been really impressed with Google's AI education, but it's kind of like Philip Morris teaching fire safety. So you gotta be careful there. Fast AI is obviously great. There's actually a brand new Andrew Ng course just dropped on Coursera, what, like a day or two ago?
Yeah, I mean, I got it today, so
Yeah, so there's a lot of great stuff on Coursera. And what was really cool is, are you guys familiar with the Columbia University free AI education? The one thing I love about this is it's a legitimate semester of content. The entire online course that you'd want to hope to take over a semester, all the materials, all the online education, it's there, completely free. Now, the only caveat is that if you ever want to claim it on your resume or get your certificate, at the end of it, completion, you would buy your certificate if you want it. But if you're just there to be educated, you can do that for free, and it's a legitimate education. So there's a lot of new models even being invented by major universities to help democratize the knowledge of this stuff, which is super interesting and cool.
I will say that if you hadn't had a chance or to even start the Andrew Ng one, it's really great. Even the start of it does a really good job at really slashing the hype away and talking about what ANI and what the difference between ANI and AGI is, and why we need to focus on ANI. So I recommend that to anyone who wants to check it out.
Yeah.
In a similar vein, he wrote a book and kind of published it chapter by chapter last year, and it's similar to what you just said. It's very high level, cuts through the bullshit, and if you're looking to get up to speed quickly, it's a good place to start. Yeah,
he also just released an article not too long ago about the 5 steps that you can take in order to start working down this path of AI. So it's really great stuff.
So other ways that we're seeing democratization when it comes to AI is just making it more affordable and accessible. So I always like to point out Kaggle, because Kaggle is a great forum if you are a startup or a owner of a small business, or you don't have the money and resources to normally hire or acquire an AI team. You can do a Kaggle competition, and you can have some of the best and brightest and put the bounty on your prize and have people compete to solve your problem. So there's a lot of big companies even putting out $10,000 prizes to get $200,000 worth of work done. And they're getting it done by really, really talented, interesting people. And usually they will leave the data set that they used, and they will publish that data set so people can replicate the results. So that's another interesting way where maybe not a data set you could use to develop your own machine learning models, but at least you can get access to it and try to replicate to get those practice reps. And then there are a lot of organizations coming together to help use AI to forward social progress. So the AI for Good Foundation, if you're not familiar, is an actual public charity. It's a 501c3, and it partners with the United Nations. And what it does is it latches on to some of the United Nations initiatives like clean water, eliminate poverty, trying to fight hunger, and it's using AI people, technology, and resources that are donated to tackle these challenges. And they have a whole bunch of initiatives. If you want to join up and donate some of your time or get on board or be affiliated, this is another way that people are trying to come together and bring this to the rest of the world that essentially is way behind our first world that we have that we take for granted a lot. There's a lot going on in AI policy. So when it comes to democratization, we have to think about things like rules and how do we make AI inclusive and fair for everyone. So you're seeing a lot of grassroots stuff. So you probably heard about Google employees banding together and talking about how they will not work on autonomous weapon systems. So people and companies are starting to take stances on the things that they will and won't do when it comes to AI. And then there are other groups like the Future for Life Foundation, which are actually actively writing AI policy. And then they want to put that policy in front of policymakers to try to advocate for things like accessibility, trying to eliminate bias, more inclusion, and trying to protect jobs when it comes to automation using AI. So you're seeing a lot more of that coming from non-government organizations than actual government organizations, with one small caveat, which I was going to mention is our friends up north are actually very progressive when it comes to AI policy. So if you aren't super familiar with what's going on with Canada at the World Economic Forum, is they're actually investing heavily, hundreds of millions of dollars, to come up with an AI strategy and bring AI programs across the constituency.
Yeah, this is actually a really interesting thing that's happening. I mean, the World Economic Forum just got done not too long ago in Davos, and it was a huge event. We got to be a part of it at Cognitive Scale, and it was really interesting conversations. But I mean, you have Angela Merkel, and all these government leaders meeting with Apple CEO, meeting with Ginny Rometty, the head of IBM, in order to really understand what does it mean for a government system to start adopting AI. And the big message that all of these tech companies are telling us is that they need to start building their own AI. And so governments are starting to get more and more hands-on. So it's really, really interesting with these conversations that are happening at the top level that we're going to see more and more of this grow.
So really, when it comes to democratization, key takeaways are this. If you are a startup or a business owner or someone who doesn't think they can afford this technology but is interested in it, you don't need to have a lot of money to get started anymore. There's a lot of ways that you can either reskill or upskill your own people to get into the exploration of AI. There's a lot of free resources available for you from a technology standpoint. There's a lot of groups, even the big guys like Amazon and Google are happy to give you tens and thousands of dollars of free cloud credit so you can run and train your models. So there's lots of ways that you can get started for free. But also start thinking about responsibility, cultural, if you are business owners or in businesses, advocate for ground rules. Try to figure out where ethically and culturally you want to apply AI and where you don't. So all these things are going to be really important now and even more so moving forward. I'll pass it over to George.
Of course, I'd press the power button on first go. Had one job, don't press the power button.
Somebody should design an algorithm to run that thing for you.
I know, right?
I have a quick question regarding like the Canada thing.
Yeah.
Are any of y'all familiar with the book AI Superpowers by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee? He's like really heavy talking about like what China is doing with AI right now. And I think it's a really big cultural shift from what America and Western countries do. And they're very heavily subsidizing AI in China to basically bootstrap, a Silicon Valley type thing in China. So I know that culturally and ethically maybe not be exactly aligned to Western culture, so that might know what your perspective is on how that.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting with the R&D. I mean, you can see the gap in just purely the R&D the government's spending. I mean, China's completely overwhelming us with the amount that's being put towards, especially artificial intelligence. I mean, I think that, especially when we talk about ethics and things like that, I mean, here at CDI, it's more of a global conversation, and so. I think that these competitions are very interesting, and I'm not really sure, what will end up happening. But it's clear that China's beating us out, and they're investing far more than we're willing to. Most of the investments that are happening in AI here are very much so from the enterprise level. Not a lot of it's happening from more of a government standpoint. It's growing, obviously, but not compared to China and what they're doing over there. I don't know if you guys got any thoughts there.
I think the other kind of interesting part about the international R&D, like looking at that from like different countries' levels of involvement and investment, I guess it also comes down to what kinds of direct applications the government is capable of seeing for artificial intelligence. And so maybe certain countries are lagging behind on that side of the government side R&D, because in China's case, there's a very direct use case that they're looking into. And so that also fuels a little bit more of the government side R&D. And so it'll be interesting as it starts looking more towards AI for good, what kinds of government programs can be amplified, rather than trying to look towards, an overarching credit system and things like that. It's like, as we find more government-directed applications, there may be kind of increased R&D interest in other countries. Okay, so augmented intelligence, this is sometimes might be like the lesser-known cousin of artificial intelligence, but what I want to do today is to make the case for augmented intelligence coming into its own as the kind of the more impactful AI for 2019. And so in one sentence, if I could kind of get something to latch on to, is that Jarvis is the biggest difference and the most important difference between Iron Man and Terminator, because a human-machine interface that works is really that important. So I'm really glad that I got an opportunity today to talk about why I see augmented intelligence becoming more important from kind of an ethical perspective, keeping humans more involved, humans in the loop, but also from a results perspective, that there are certain use cases where this kind of machine-human back and forth input creates a better, more robust, more understandable model. So I'm going to take us back to just a quick origins of AI. The left figure is a little bit more familiar to probably most of us in the room. That'd be Alan Turing. 1950, Can Machines Think, kind of introducing the Turing test, the decision of, how do we decide that it's truly thinking. 1956, it kind of gets popularized at a Dartmouth conference, and the idea of artificial intelligence as AI basically takes hold from there. And going forward, if you hear AI, the almost immediate direct response is artificial intelligence. But on the right, we have another figure who may be a little bit less familiar. That is Douglas Engelbart. So he's most famous for his 1968, what's called the mother of all demos. And so in this demonstration, he demonstrated collaborative text editing, video conferencing, introducing simple tools such as the mouse. And again, this is 1968. And so it's one of the most kind of impressive, daring attempts to demonstrate new technology in kind of one live sitting. And what's interesting about this is that he sees this as part of his 1962 publication where it's augmenting the human intelligence. It's what kind of language, artifacts, and methodologies can we change in order to improve the capacity of the human. Essentially finding ways to put the human at the center, and rather than having the computers for an austere military or scientific application, this was really taking that capacity for augmenting human intelligence to the everyday individual, and this what kind of shifts the mindset around computing. So this seems maybe a little bit theoretical at this point, and so what I want to do is take us through a historical example where we see the progress of an artificial intelligence, an augmented intelligence, and then finally kind of looping back the cycle back to artificial intelligence. And that example would be chess centaurs. So in chess, the kind of 1998 famous instances on the left here, it's Deep Blue versus Kasparov. Kasparov, this was the rematch a year later. Deep Blue had lost the first year and it came back, was able to win in a best-of-7 series. And this was the first moment where basically we started having games against human champions, essentially, as one of the major benchmarks for AI. This was one of the, I guess, the first ones where the game was able to succeed. And the interesting part about this is Kasparov was convinced that there were humans behind the machine, kind of mechanical Turk style, if you will, that there was no way he believed that they could have improved so much in 1 year that when he only, I think it was tied 1 game in the first instance, would lose then to the machine in the next year. And so this was what started the beginnings of centaur chess. So the idea of, what if, the algorithm was cooperating with the human? What if they were actually coming together to make each of those decisions? And so in 2003, we had what was a chess centaur tournament. We had the best AIs, the best human competitors, and human plus AI teams. The kind of most obvious result that was demonstrated in Deep Blue and further progressed to 2003 was that the AIs really kicked humans' butts. Like, it wasn't close, It's like they demonstrated kind of an analytical superiority in chess, and this has just never stopped. That gap has never stopped growing. The most interesting part, though, is that the overall winner of the tournament was actually a human AI team. It was one of the chess centaurs. And you would think, why isn't this like me running alongside Kevin Durant in a 3-legged race? Wouldn't I just be dragging him and slowing him down the whole way? But the instance that allows us to kind of achieve a next level of intelligence is the fact that there was a designated system where each of the 3 AIs were trained on a different kind of data set. They were trained to make kind of different assumptions. And when they diverted from one another, when there was a disagreement, then the human stepped in. There was a categorized place for where the human would then be able to apply that kind of human level intuition while still taking advantage of the intricate nature of, having an iterative program guess all these moves in advance and kind of understand the state of the board. Now, if you've been following AlphaGo chess, or Alpha Chess 0, is basically taking the same deep reinforcement learning methods that defeated the greatest Go player in the world, and now it's the greatest chess player in the world. So we've made this kind of full loop back, where originally artificial intelligence was the prominent, most dominant method. Augmented intelligence became the next kind of dominant method for several years. And the distinction is that this new artificial intelligence, bringing a human along, kind of slows down the process. Because Alpha 0 is starting to make moves that are beyond human comprehension. Where it's like, why would you throw your king out like that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, we can't make those jump-in decisions to improve the algorithm, and that's why at this stage, artificial has taken the reins again. So this kind of historic example that demonstrates the difficulties between when do you delegate, when do you cooperate, and when can you actually achieve a superior result through augmented intelligence. So again, this cornerstone challenge of augmented intelligence is, at what point is it better to delegate away a task? At what point is it more efficient to do so? And at which points is it going to present kind of a newfound benefit, a new solution that you may not have even thought of by having this augmented approach? So a quick graphic from Capgemini here in 2018 presenting kind of the importance of an augmented intelligence in 2019. One of the frameworks they help to use here is essentially computing power, processing complexity on one side, and then structured to unstructured data on the other axis. So tasks that reside kind of in near the origin, like desktop automation, these are ones that are very, very clearly appropriate for artificial intelligence, things that it's much simpler to delegate away a task. You know, you're transferring a routine data set from this location to another location. It's always the same place, it's always the same name, you're good to go. You know, maybe it's filling out web forms. These are things that highly structured, have low processing complexity, and it makes the most sense for the automation delegation side of things. As we reach kind of the farther end of the right spectrum, where it's this high complexity and it's also very unstructured data, it becomes much simpler and kind of more intuitive to actually apply this augmented approach. So for instance, Baxter Robot essentially is, you know, the little red robot with the smile on its face. I don't know if you guys have seen it. But essentially it's an industrial robot that can be individually trained with a human so that it can learn any task. Now, training an industrial robot that can do any task is quite the accomplishment. It would require a much more sophisticated artificial approach if it had no human involvement. But by having the human in the loop and training with the robot, you can achieve this higher level of tasks despite it being a very unstructured data. So I want to go over 3 regions in 2019 where this divide between artificial and augmented intelligence will kind of have the largest role to play. Because again, I'm not arguing that artificial intelligence is going to be holistically replaced by augmented. I'm saying that there are several regions in which augmented intelligence really does make the difference. The first of those is human conversation. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the duplex reveal in 2018 where it was able to have live conversation with a salon assistant and book an appointment flawlessly. And you almost wonder if on the other end she even knew she was talking to, duplex, if at any point she was ever alerted, because it was so seamless. And so on one side we see voice assistants, and in voice technology, voice assistants firmly occupy the area of delegation, where these are the tasks that we want to no longer take care of ourselves, we want something to be able to take care of it for us, and that's the beauty of those kinds of services. On the other side, even though the underlying technology may be roughly similar, is IBM Debater. In 2008, this is kind of the iteration where you saw Deep Blue grow into Watson for Jeopardy, and now this is IBM Debater, kind of the third iteration, so to speak, of that. And what it did is it took on human debate champions and was able to convincingly, according to audience judge, demonstrate, that it was a preferred argument, that it was kind of more informative. But the interesting part here is that IBM Debater isn't going to the law firms. It isn't going to politicians and saying, we can talk better than you. Let's replace this aspect of conversation, debate, and convincing. And instead, it's aimed as a device that will be interactive with individuals, that they can learn from IBM Debater, that maybe you don't see the issue on the same side as the majority, or even you're trying to understand the minority opinion. IBM Debater can then aggregate those articles, aggregate that opinion, and put together a cohesive statement that you can then understand and be persuaded, and you can kind of see the other side a little bit better. And so in this way, we can see that in voice technology, there may be not one that ends up dominating the field for voice technology, but this is a clear kind of fork in the road, so to speak, where it's like more augmented style voice technology is intended to improve the human intelligence perspective and knowledge around an issue, whereas the delegative kind of artificial intelligence version is trying to take away aspects and get that work done for us.
This is actually a really interesting divide. I mean, if you watch the most recent IBM Project Debater, it lost, but that's again, completely based on the judge's opinion. But the interesting thing here is, when you go from the computation power, that shows where AI is really dominated, and we see that historically. And I think now is where we're starting to see this divide, where we're starting to get into conversation and language. It's still very elementary. And so, I think it's very interesting. I think human conversations has been one of the areas that, we see chatbots all out there everywhere now today. They're not great, okay? They're, in most cases, pretty bad. And so it just shows you that it's not ready to do that yet. And so in those cases, a lot of times, the augmented intelligence has really been winning there. It's awesome.
For sure. And I kind of see language as maybe another in the kind of the chess analogy, where it's as of right now, it's kind of the better solution is the more augmented one, where it's like we haven't quite gotten the full grasp of a general language like bot, but maybe in the future that will be kind of what is capable of artificial intelligence. So we've kind of met that point where it's the chatbot's artificial intelligence is clearly being beaten out by more of these robust human involved. Knowledge work actually has a very kind of set out layers of rules, and even though they're complex and require multiple years of study, they can be learned by an AI that demonstrate how knowledge work is being replaced in artificial intelligence, kind of the delegative capacity. Babylon originally started as a healthcare option where it was, schedule an appointment with a doctor, and it was more of like a telemedicine solution. However, once they started seeing that a lot of the requests are, these really simple, hey, I have symptoms A, B, and C, I live in these kinds of situations, I am 90-some-odd% likely that I can be easily diagnosed for one of these common, not disease, but kind of situations, common things that can be easily diagnosed. Whereas in all reality, the more complex area of the doctor is where it's like the kind of the edge cases, the in-between, trying to decide between several possible scenarios. So in LawGeeks, it's essentially automating away the contract review. So again, not replacing lawyers, but it's delegating away portions of the task that are well-defined, have high structure, and low complexity. Basically, I'm looking for these features, and I want to go through a large amount of data doing so. And so these are the things that, again, lend themselves, that are currently knowledge work, but lend themselves towards delegation. And then the final example here is the demonstration of AutoML. Essentially, instead of having, highly specialized PhD students, the only few maybe in the world who can think of the exact right structure for a specific task, instead, AutoML basically says we can trade that intuition with computational power. We can essentially search the space for all of the architectures and then find the best kind of approach, more computationally driven rather than having that kind of expert insight. And so, again, not necessarily saying you can replace computer scientists and that robots will start programming themselves. No, it's a kind of a narrow situation of deciding an architecture where you can trade again, delegate for the computational power. On the other side of the spectrum is we have Ray Dalio's DOTS program, and I'm not talking about the flash frozen ice cream. It's essentially a way of evaluating human decision making. And so they are all rated across several, capacity to be both open-minded and assertive, linear thinking versus, divergent thinking. And each person gets what you kind of see there is the baseball card. And as they make each decision, they, instead of basing off of strictly, majority wins, it's a meritocracy version. So instead of replacing those individual knowledge workers' kind of insight, it's instead realizing where they're most valuable. And so when you come to that augmented decision, you've actually taken into consideration where each of your individuals are kind of have the greatest insight, the most experience, etc. And finally, autonomous vehicles. So on the left, as Waymo has driven over 10 million miles, this kind of complex relationship of different funding, different technology, autonomous vehicles is going to kind of be hitting the road soon. And the difference is that they essentially have to account for kind of all of the complex scenarios around driving. And that's kind of a high-level computational task. And in the instance of Uber, where it doesn't necessarily train on the specific situation that it encountered, lives can be lost. And so if you're looking for strictly the safety benefit, an augmented intelligence approach is something maybe like SystemI, where it's alerting, it's evaluating the same images, it's evaluating the same kind of exterior car situation, but instead of taking over the car and telling it which directions to go, it's instead providing safety alerts. And it's essentially reaching a similar benefit without as much responsibility on the AI to make those decisions. So I'm going to run through real quick a couple of case studies now that basically demonstrate these are the kinds of the hands-on, these are a business situation, this is the previous solution, and this is why an augmented approach actually ended up yielding outsized benefits. So those previous three were where it's going to impact in 2019, and these are kind of areas where augmented intelligence was the kind of de facto preferred approach. So with Magoosh, it's a service that essentially for students, for test prep, they cover GRE, LSAT, etc. And what they have is they have a team of about 50 dedicated customer service representatives that address account questions, that address I need to start a new service, all of these kinds of customer service complaints. And the thing is that they've established around 900 macros of this is the typically correct solution for this kind of problem. However, this was completely manual. Even though this was delegated away in a sense that all of these answers were already kind of spoken and addressed, people had to search and find which one of the 900 were most appropriate for that situation. And so Digital Genius cooperated with Magoosh and essentially trained deep learning models to find kind of the context of each of the questions, and it helped in categorizing the metadata around the question when it came in. So about 83% were assigned the right category metadata, like what type of complaint is it. About 92%, or sorry, I flipped those. 83% were assigned the correct macro, and 92% were assigned the correct metadata. So it's not about replacing the customer service representative with kind of these omnipresent chatbots. It's instead making the customer service representative infinitely more capable of doing that same job by having this human-machine interface. And then kind of what I would consider one of the hallmarks of why augmented intelligence wins out over artificial intelligence is in cases where it's kind of very fuzzy and evolving in terms of the data that they're trying to address. So in this case, it's anomaly detection for cybersecurity, trying to determine which events are essentially attacks on your system. So what this is a Pattern X CSAIL cooperative, and the project was called AI Squared, or Analyst Intuition and Artificial Intelligence. So 3 unsupervised learning methods would kind of suggest candidate events. And these events were, based off of what those, if these are irregular events, and maybe the first day the expert would be presented with 400 cases. And then over time, as they're getting categorized by these human experts, it presents less and less of these kinds of false positives where it's saying, I realize now that that irregularity is just part of the system, or I realize that irregularity is part of a new attack. It's part of a kind of a new paradigm of, of this anomaly that we're trying to prevent against. So it was trained against 3.6 billion log lines over about 3 months. And what's beautiful about it is this positive feedback loop. As essentially it gets more attacks, it gets more feedback from the human expert, and it learns more nuanced information about the types of attacks it needs to be preventing. And so what the big impact here is that it reduced false positives by almost 5-fold. And so the amount of human expert at the end trying to determine whether this is irregular, this is an attack, etc., is vastly reduced. And it ended up detecting 85% of attacks, which beats current benchmarks by almost 3-fold. So what the interesting kind of quote takeaway that I found from this was a computer scientist researcher at Notre Dame was talking about how this approach, this cycle of analyst intuition along with artificial intelligence, my kind of core argument for why augmented intelligence is the next wave into 2019, is this idea that any of these kind of fuzzy, poorly described data sets that are difficult because it's like there's so many nuances as to why you would say one case was an anomaly, one case was an attack, one case was just your servers restarting on a Monday morning. Like, these are the kinds of things that with this human in the loop that you're more capable of kind of learning from and adjusting to. So finally, what I see for our augmented future would be the opportunities is the more higher return on investment. There's a lot less risk of displacing jobs because it's kind of focused around the individual in place. You're learning from how they behave, how you can optimize their job, and essentially you're providing them with better tools to be, more equipped to make better decisions. And so by keeping the human at the center of this, a lot of the concern around the displacement of jobs is, more or less circumvented. And it builds from and learns from this analyst or kind of human intuition. And this applies very specifically in these difficult anomaly detection, these sorts of ill-defined problems. And difficulties, obviously, as you involve more human in the loop, more kind of direct feedback, you have to have some kind of graphical interface, you have to have some kind of audio feedback, you have to have these direct steps where they're going to be re-involved in the process. And who gets the final word? In the chess situation, the AI-human team was only effective because there was a clear distinction of when who would get the final word. In cases where that's less clear, augmented intelligence becomes infinitely more difficult because you don't know whether to trust essentially, the automated piloting systems or the human-trained pilot in, the aircraft, the vehicle, the driver, or the advanced autonomous system. It's this kind of decision that makes the movement towards augmented intelligence quite difficult. And finally, it requires more collaboration. You have to be more hands-on with the individuals you're kind of replacing and working with because you have to understand why that human intuition would somehow supersede that iterative power of an artificial approach. I have the picture on the right here of Neuralink because really, he says it's a bandwidth issue. That the issue with essentially achieving this human-machine cooperation beyond kind of the augmentation we have just by using our phones is the fact that our phones' bandwidth is limited to how fast you can type, how fast you can hear. But again, Neuralink is that ultimate future towards an augmented intelligence where it's no longer a bandwidth issue, where it's a direct communication. And so hopefully I've made the case as to why a Jarvis that is a human-machine interface helping us kind of be the best version of ourselves is kind of more promising and hopefully a little bit less terrifying than an eventual future of Terminator. Thank you.
Awesome. Any questions before we move on to the last section? No? Awesome. All right, so this really leads into our last section, both of the conversations we've had prior, and it's really around ethics and AI. And I want to make something very clear now. This is a conversation that's happening globally. There is no bullseye right now. There is no ethical algorithm. There is none of that. This is a conversation that's happening at the highest levels, and we're only now really starting to realize that to be able to make an impact in this, we have to look and focus locally. And so that's where a lot of this stuff comes in. One thing we know is that adoption is on the rise. It's growing like crazy. We have the number of businesses that are actually investing towards this, and then the startups that are starting to put their own AI projects out there has grown exponentially over the last few years. This has caused a lot of issues that we've already been kind of present and a part of. I think many of you are familiar with Tay, the chatbot that was put out on Twitter. And luckily, with the beautiful trolls that we have online, Tay, by the end of the day, was not only a Nazi, but questionably a racist as well. And so this is a good sign, or not a great, it's a bad sign of what happens when we don't really put a lot of thought into the things we put out there. There was obviously the Wiki chatbots that were going back and forth on who really had the right information as they were updating Wiki. There's machine vision and the skin tones that it's able to recognize. We have soap dispensers and all sorts of different machine vision apps out there that weren't recognizing darker skin compared to lighter skin tones. And so we also have a lot happening in the gaming world where we saw this gaming company developed an artificial intelligence, and it ended up not only creating its own super weapon, but it started going around and killing all the players at the same time out of their control.
And then it started fishing on Twitter to get more players to beat, to bring them inside the game so they could absolutely just crush them. So it's got really weird very quickly.
Yeah, so really this says of the world that, okay, look, we need to maybe put the brakes on for a second and think about how we're going about this. And really, these are some of the AI concerns that we need to be focusing on. I mean, data rights has been a huge growing issue. We've seen it with, in Europe and GDPR. The privacy issues here in America are growing constantly. We have, explainability, being able to be transparent with what we're doing and being able to explain how your data is being used and the algorithms we're using. Fairness and bias. I mean, bias has been a huge conversation in AI. And we obviously are very aware of our conscious bias, but there's a lot of subconscious bias that we don't realize we're putting into our algorithms, and we're also putting into the way we collect data. Robustness, being able to really detect the adversarial attacks. I mean, that's really where we can talk about, like Tay, for example. They had nothing in place to really keep the bot protected from the negative tweets that were being sent and chatted through this algorithm. Robustness and compliance. Compliance is really important as well because this is really about a full end-to-end implementation, governance, and it's really about this whole idea of keeping the human in the loop. How can we make sure that we're not just turning the switch on and letting the reins go? We're there, we're a part of it, we're constantly iterating, making sure that our algorithms are being up to date, using the data for the best way it can. So, as I mentioned with Tay in the Microsoft chatbot, there's really two areas that this kind of focused on that it missed the loop here. And that's going to be with data rights and robustness. It really, again, was not very clear on how they were collecting their data and where that was being held and how it was being held. And so it wasn't being filtered either, where the robustness of the actual algorithm they had in place had no ability to really defend against these adversarial attacks that were coming towards it. And the users were luckily able to kind of take the reins and make Tay what they wanted her to be. So this is obviously really huge for the company. I mean, as Microsoft as a company, it doesn't look great. Not only does it hurt the industry and what people think of AI, but it also hurts the brand, and it really just hurts innovation as a whole. With the Wiki Edit Box, we saw a lot of this. Same thing with data rights and robustness. It really had no ability to be able to attack from itself, and who was really held governance over the other to be able to make those updates. Fairness it really comes into play here because of the algorithms it had in place. Really did not set it up and to allow these bots to truly work together. So it became more of a versus and a competition rather than actual improvement on the augmentation there. So this one's really interesting. Not only have we seen this with soap dispensers, but we've seen this with other machine vision things out there. And this is really an issue with explainability, fairness, and robustness. Not really being fair towards the different skin tones, not training our systems with data that will set it up for success regardless of where it's being used. And this obviously led to a lot of issues. This is not a great time really in society to be making issues like this specifically. So not only does this obviously hurt the industry, but this just really isn't a good representation for how we want AI to be used moving forward. And as we spoke about this, this is huge because it obviously only increased the public's fear of Skynet. If I have to hear one more complaint about Skynet, I don't know what I'll do. I may actually go create Skynet myself. It's a little irritating, but this is something that's really important because we're seeing a lot of this. We're seeing, the gaming environment's becoming a bigger testing ground for AI, and these conversations and these issues are going to continue to come up, and we have to be able to start recognizing the issues before they happen. So, a big question is, am I biased? Are you biased? Well, the short answer is yes. We obviously can try to stay ahead of the curve as much as we can to try to make sure that we're not using stereotypes or we're not using any sort of confirmation bias. But unfortunately, there are a tremendous amount of unconscious biases that we deal with. I mean, there's shortcut biases. Again, this is going to be your stereotyping, thinking you're already filling in the gaps in your head, and you're completely missing the chance to really go and evaluate those gaps and make sure you have them filled correctly. Impartiality bias. This is where you're going to get a lot of bandwagoning. You're going to get a lot of confirmation bias. They think they already know the answer, and they're going to have the right answer, and they're going to be able to find the data that's going to be able to explain that. And then we have, of course, self-interest bias. Where we contributed the most. So obviously, they weren't very cooperative with us. Ergo, we were right, they were wrong, kind of situation. So this is really important to keep in mind because regardless of whether we like it or not, an individual is not a good checks and balances for their own bias. And this is really where it gets to, how do we apply ethics in AI? Because again, it's not a simple algorithm you can put in place. It's not a button you can push. It really is a philosophy that's starting from the global level. This is coming.
Real quick point on the bias.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question? I had someone ask me today, it was an administrator for the University of Texas, El Paso, just on the topic of bias, if I've seen any work being done towards eliminating bias inherently in data sets. And I couldn't cite really a strong or specific example, but are you guys seeing that work being done? Yeah.
Google pretty recently, one big problem with facial recognition data sets is that they just have way more white men than they have black women, for example.
Right.
So Google put out a pretty big competition about having a diverse data set, so that when you have pictures of Indian weddings, that'll also get tagged as a wedding, as opposed to only people in white dresses. Mm-hmm. Also, the FFHQ data set, it's Flickr photo high quality or something like that, was recently released, and it has a sort of an emphasis on trying to get a pretty good representation of many different faces, many different people, both old and young and white and black.
They actually pulled that data set right before Flickr started deleting pictures permanently. So it's kind of like an archive as well. So they grabbed it.
What about in autonomous? Are you guys seeing it? I'd imagine autonomous vehicles, there's a lot going on in those types of systems, and I can see biases, not being able to identify certain types of people. Have you guys seen anything where that's been an issue, or know of how automotive might be trying to tackle that? Would you know by chance?
No, I don't know any issues with that, but we do a lot of research on, bias. There is a training model that recognizes bicycles, but that model didn't recognize the people who ride that new stuff, you know.
Oh, like the scooters?
Yeah. Because the model was particularly targeted to bicyclists only. So, and then, well, by default, we thought that it will also recognize the scooters.
Sure.
It didn't.
Right.
So we have to retrain that model.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, that's just one example that comes to mind.
Okay.
Yeah, and it goes to show you that, I mean, this can be replicated in many different examples, and this is more than just a social issue. I mean, these are issues that we are, you know, dealing with all across the board when it comes to machine learning and these algorithms.
But I think that the fact that we can't come up with a ton of really good examples there just shows that there's a need, right? So if you're interested in trying to hook yourself to some sort of social progress cause when it comes to the intersection of artificial intelligence, you know, trying to figure out ways to apply AI to eliminate bias in data, I think is a really cool opportunity that I haven't seen a lot of work being done.
Yeah. So speaking of, you know, how do I apply AI or ethics in AI? Again, you know, as I mentioned before, these are conversations that are happening at the very highest level. It was a huge conversation at Davos. We have, you know, whether it be governments, that seems to be the big focus around, you know, how can we start implementing ethical AI, responsible AI. But a lot of these conversations are starting to lead down the path that, again, we can have these global conversations and make sure we're all on the same page, but in reality, it's going to be each individual within each of their businesses, the individuals who are looking to apply AI to their products or to their business. It's going to be their responsibility to make sure that they have the checks and balances in place to make sure that they're being ethical and responsible with their AI development and product development here. You know, a great little quote here from the CIO of Government of Canada. Data rights, including ethical artificial intelligence uses, is one of the most pressing issues for any country responsible for serving digital citizens. So this is going to be something that obviously every country is going to be focused on moving forward, is how can they start taking a better advantage of their data while at the same time making sure they're having you know, that trust and that responsible approach to AI. So what does that mean really for you as individuals? I think, you know, again, what we can do here and the best way to look about this is not on the job of the machine learning engineer. This is not on the response, it's not on the data scientist's shoulders. This isn't on the CEO's shoulders. Each individual comes to the table and can be a part of this ethical conversation around developing AI to make sure that we are checking each other, making sure that we not only assure that we have these checks and balances in the upfront while we're developing these systems, but while they go live, when we have systems in place, the governance is also there in place to make sure that we're making proper iterations to ensure that our algorithms are really built and future-proof to avoid those types of issues. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with this, but something that you know, I've done some work with and quite attached to the community is this ethics canvas. This is a great canvas really for a business to use or a company to use, or really even just a project looking to implement artificial intelligence, to bring a team together, really put on paper what are they trying to accomplish, what are some of the risks and issues that they could come across, and what are some of the ways that we can start addressing that now in the strategy phase. That way when we start actually producing this and we start moving forward, we're already set up for those failures that we could possibly hit along the way.
It's one of the community members for City.ai that developed this ethics canvas too, I believe.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And this is actually kind of leading into, I guess, a semi-announcement, but we are opening up, starting in autumn of this year, an AI ethics track that's going to be global. This ethics track is tied through City AI, and will be offered here in Austin. It's going to be offered all around the world. But its main focus is to not only do workshops like this and give you guys takeaways that you can go take to your business and implement there, but also you know, offer you know, panels and keynotes from people around the world, and what are they doing in order to start implementing ethics in AI and making sure they're approaching artificial intelligence in a responsible and trustworthy way. So that's going to start coming out in autumn. I recommend you guys get involved in the community, and would love to have you guys a part of that track. We're going to be planning that out through this summer, and I'll be happy to give you guys more updates as we get closer to the end of the year. So yeah, that kind of wraps it up.
Yeah, that's it. If you so one of our biggest missions for being ambassadors of this community is to grow the community. Without people, we have nothing and nothing to share. So if you guys would like to follow us along or find out about future events, there's literally no obligation other than just to follow us or reach out to one of us so we can invite you to the LinkedIn group. That's the easiest way to just get on the knowledge share, to collaborate with other people in the community, help us set up a meetup. If you guys have suggestions for content, Again, we're doing all sorts of stuff, hands-on workshops, more educational content, more conversational fireside type content like this. We're definitely open to other ideas. It's a pretty mixed group of technical and non-technical people working in the field or interested in getting in the field of artificial intelligence. So if you guys are looking for more technical content, that's one area that we haven't done a ton of work yet, only because our co-founders are more strategic in nature. So if you want to be a technical ambassador, come talk to me. We'd certainly love more technical content, obviously. But yeah, easy ways to follow us along. We'd love to grow the community, and please share the information of the community, and hopefully we can get other people to join up too. So thanks so much for bearing the elements and hanging out with us for so long, and we'll stick around to chat if you guys want to.
Awesome.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah, yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I'm really interested,
So if you put an awesome AI in LinkedIn, I don't get anything related to awesome city AI. I found city AI from your but not awesome.
So just that's super weird, 'cause I actually just searched it yesterday and found it.
Your algorithms are probably more attuned to it than mine.
Well, I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah.
It's going to default to like people and businesses. So it's removing all people businesses.
We now have 30 members, sir.
Alright. I think I invited you already.
Did you?
Yeah. I thought so.
It doesn't say request pending. Invitation.
I'm rarely.
What's that?
Okay, cool.
So right now it's just to discuss everything is restricted to that down to
Yeah.